Hello YouTubers, and welcome to Brownell's Tech Tips. In this video I'm going to show you how to configure your wireless router and set up the security so that way you guarantee you are the only one that uses your internet connection and you're not supplying free internet to your neighbors, passers-by, and whoever might want to just sit outside and hack into your system. The first thing you have to do is figure out what brand of router you have. The three most common ones you'll find in most households that most people purchase today, especially from Walmart, is Linksys, which is made by Cisco, Belkin, and D-Link. D-Links aren't quite as good, but they do work. Belkins and Linksys are about the best two, and Netgears. Netgears work pretty well, and you'll find them in several homes. A lot of your ISPs will actually supply Netgears to a lot of people, and your ISP is your internet service provider. But once you figure out exactly what you've got, if you've already got an internet connection, you can bring up your web browser, go to Google, and you need to find out what your default password and what your default username and password will be to log in to that router. Let's say you have a Linksys E1000, and then we'll just put in default username and password. And then you see several different ones. You can literally pick whatever one you want. I'm just going to go with the first one that comes up. As you can see right here, it shows default username none, default password admin. And it also shows you the default IP address that you're going to connect to it with via your web browser, which is 192.168.1.1. So all you do is go up there to your address bar, type in 192.168.1.1. As you can see, it pops up on mine asking for the authentication. Now for the actual default username and password, on a lot of them it'll be admin or blank username admin for password, or admin for username blank password. Most of them in general are going to follow somewhere around that type of configuration for default, and you trust me, you're going to want to change that, because if you leave the default username and password default, most people within a matter of seconds is going to be able to figure out exactly what your username and password is, and you're not going to want that. You're really not, because that means they can very easily go in and start making changes. You can set up all the security you want. As long as they can figure out what the username and password is, they can go in and change it and drop all the security and have full access. But anyhow, once you get in there, most of the routers are going to have this basic configuration. Things might be in different locations, like you have the wireless tab up here, security, access restrictions. It might be over here on the side. You might have to dig around to find it, but for the most part, they're going to be pretty well similar. One of the common tricks to secure your system is to get away from all defaults, including the IP address. 192.168.1.1 is a Class C IP address. It is considered a non-routable IP address, which means it's a private IP, and it is basic default on most of all routers. Now, if you got your router from your ISP, a lot of times they will configure it to a different IP address. Some of them will leave it on the 192 Class C IP address configuration. Some of them will have it on 176, 179, 172. Some of them will use the 10 range Class A. And a lot of them will set up username and password. And you'll have to get that information from your ISP. They're supposed to supply it to you. They don't necessarily always do so. if you want to be able to get in and make your own changes. As I stated, most of all these work about the same. Okay, so first thing we need to do is make sure that it is taking off all the defaults. So on your internet connection, leave it on automatic configuration DHCP. That will allow the router to automatically detect your internet connection, and it'll automatically configure itself properly. For your host, just pick something that works for you that you can remember, like my home, your name, just something. Don't worry about the domain name, leave that alone along with the MTU. Now you want to configure your IP address, and you don't want to run the absolute defaults on that. Now that we know what the IP address ranges are, I think I'm going to configure this one with a Class B IP address. And we're just going to make it 172.20.101. Okay, 172.20.101. And I'm going to go ahead and make it the last IP address in the string. So that way the systems and everything connected to it can use from 1 to 254 or 253. I never use 255 for various reasons. Most of the systems won't even allow you to configure 255. Okay, and then you come down here and you see your DHCP server enabled. Leave that enabled. That'll allow your systems that are hardwired or wireless or any other devices to be able to automatically connect. There are some devices that you absolutely cannot go in and manually configure the IP address, so it has to have the DHCP active. Okay, and then you want to make sure that you set your time zone for where you're actually at, and then just click Save Settings. It'll pop up saying settings are successful, and then you can just click Continue, and now you'll see you have your IP address and everything all configured. Now for the DDNS, dynamic DNS, I wouldn't worry about that, leave that alone. MAC address clone, you can do that if you want to. All the MAC address clone does is it clones the MAC address to your computer. Advanced routing, you'll want to make sure NAT is enabled, and if you want, you can enable dynamic routing, but I wouldn't recommend it because it'll disable NAT. NAT will actually work a little bit better than dynamic routing unless you really know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing, you can run the dynamic routing and make everything work absolutely wonderful. But for the most part, most home users are not going to get into that kind of advanced settings, so leave NAT enabled. As long as NAT is enabled, dynamic routing will be disabled. Next will be wireless. Leave the Wi-Fi protected setup alone. Leave it set on manual. In your network mode, you can set it to either A, B, or N on most of them. I would leave it on mixed, so that way if you do have any A, G, B, or any devices like that, they'll all be able to connect to the wireless. Then of course for your SSID, you want to configure it to something that whenever you do a scan for your wireless network, you'll be able to easily spot and know that that is my network. And then the channel width, you can set it to automatic or you can manually set it. I leave it on automatic, 20 megahertz or 40. SSID broadcast enabled. If you really want to hide your wireless network where people can't just do a scan and see your SSID, you can disable that, but this is a case where you're going to have to manually tell it what your SSID is and hope that you can remember what the SSID is exactly. Otherwise, I would leave it enabled, but to disable it is one of the greatest methods for security, in which you can actually make it where nobody can see the actual ID to your wireless network. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, you're not going to see very many of them that have the 5 gigahertz wireless setting along with the 2.4 gigahertz. Most of them are going to be 2.4 only. You will run into a few routers out there that have both 5 and 2.4 gigahertz. In that case, you just configure both of them. And next is going to be wireless security. Here you go to the security mode, and you'll see it says WEP, WPA, WPA2, personal on both of those, and you have WPA enterprise, radius, and disabled. In most cases, you're going to want to use WPA2 personal, and you're going to give it a passphrase. Now, some of them will allow you to set it up with a WPA mixed mode, which means it'll run WPA 1 and 2, which is really nice, particularly if you have older devices that won't work with WPA2 but will work with WPA. Never, ever, ever use WEP. And for the WPA, make sure you select TKIP or AES. If you want to just use straight up AES encryption, you can select AES only. But TKIP or AES works decent. Gives it two different means of encryption on the wireless. So that people can't just sit there and sniff out your packets and be able to see everything you're doing. And then with your passphrase, you want to make sure to set it up to something that you can easily remember. But you want to make sure that it's not something that people can easily figure out what it is. And then of course again, you just click Save Settings to save the settings for where you're currently at. You'll see where it says settings are successful. Just click Continue. Ignore the fact that it went back to disabled. This is actually a simulator. And then you can turn on MAC address filtering if you really want. In this case, you'll have to know what the MAC address to each device is. I don't recommend this for new users, but if you do know what the MAC addressing is, you can select it to enabled and put in the MAC address for the devices that are going to connect up wirelessly. And absolutely nothing that doesn't have a MAC address programmed in here can connect to your wireless network. Next one is Advanced Wireless Settings. This one you're probably going to leave alone, because if you make too many changes here, you can really mess things up. So we're going to go to Security. And you see how right here it says SPI Firewall Protection. Most of all newer routers have a built-in hardware firewall. Filter anonymous internet requests, filter the ident port, filter multicast, and make sure it filters NAT redirection. This is going to greatly increase the security on your system. You can also tell it to filter proxy, Java, ActiveX, and cookies. However, most of these are going to be required. The only other one I might consider selecting would be the proxy, because there's times that it can jump you through a proxy system that you don't really necessarily want to go through. And then as far as it goes for the VPN pass-through, all those are going to be enabled by default. I would just leave that alone. If you're not going to use any VPN, you can disable them, but you never know. And if you have anybody that needs to VPN into your system, say like you're using TeamViewer or something like that, you'll want to leave these enabled. Storage. This one, in some routers, actually have a USB port in which you can connect up a hard drive or a USB drive directly to the back of it, and it'll actually act as a server. As you can see right here, there's the disk, there's the media server. If yours has this and you actually choose to do this, it's a very good method for having backups directly on the system, or running your own media server, running it as a file server. Other than that, I would pretty well ignore this partition, but you can configure it to run if your system has it. So like right here, you can enable a UPnP media server. Right here you can set what the name and the folder and everything else is. FTP server, I would leave that alone. FTP is a bit too unsecure and sends most of everything in direct open text, which means everything that is sent can be very easily read. So next we're going to go to access restrictions. This, you can set a blocking policy for certain times and days that it can go on the internet. If you have a router that's specific for your kids and you only have set hours that you want them to be able to get online, you can actually configure that right here. Applications and gaming is for opening up ports and systems to game consoles. You can open up ports to specific programs on the computer. For the most part, you're going to leave this alone, but if by chance you actually do have one that you want to configure, you need to know what the ports are, whether it's TCP or UDP, the IP address that it goes to, and then you select over here and enable it and then click Save Settings. Port forwarding does pretty much the same thing, except for it'll actually forward the ports instead of just opening them up. Port triggering is a little bit different. It'll trigger the ports and then forward them to whatever port you need it to. DMZ will open up everything to whatever specific IP address or MAC address you program in. QoS, which is quality of service, you want to make sure is actually enabled. So that way if you're running Skype or something like that, most of your ISPs will run QoS. If you're running like Skype, MSN Messenger, Yahoo Messenger, you'll want to make sure that this is actually configured and you give a fairly decent priority to it, so that way if you're voice chatting with someone on Skype, it will automatically take over and run rather well. QoS will actually ensure that whatever messenger you're running, whenever you're doing VoIP or video, it'll give the packets a higher priority, so that way your service is less glitchy, less buggy, sounds a lot better. And that's pretty much the entire purpose for QoS. Now we'll go to administration. Right here, router password. Make sure you give your router a password that you can remember and set it to something that's not going to be easy to figure out or hack. This is what's going to set up the largest amount of security to your router, and the fact that if no one else knows what that password is, they can't get in there and make changes. Now you can set it up to where you're accessed via regular HTTP, or you set it up on HTTPS. I don't recommend setting it on HTTPS because there's some browsers that if you don't have the exact perfect, and I do mean perfect, certificate for that, the browser absolutely will not let you connect in. So leave it on the HTTP. Just make sure you set a good password. And I would leave the remote management disabled unless you want someone easily being able to hack into the backside of your router just to go in and change configurations. Log, you can turn logging on. I would recommend leaving it disabled. These things only have a finite amount of memory, and with the logging turned on, it will fill up that memory and cause the thing to lock up very quickly, especially if you do a lot of downloads and stuff like that, because it's tracking everything that goes on with the router. Now if you're having a problem and you're wanting to log and see where the problem's at, that's fine. Don't turn it on and leave it on. You'll have lots of problems. You'll find yourself unplugging it and plugging it back in to do a reboot to get the system back up and running. Diagnostics, I wouldn't worry too much about that one. You can do the ping tests and stuff, but I would just leave it alone. Diagnostics really only comes in handy whenever you're setting up your own servers, or if you have multiple switches or something like that on your own home network. Most home users aren't going to have that, but if you do have that kind of a setup, you're probably already going to know what this is all for anyway. Factory defaults. You can restore the whole thing back to the way it was the day it came from the factory by simply going to this tab and selecting that button. If you don't want to reconfigure the entire thing, I'd highly recommend you leave that button alone. And then firmware upgrade. If you downloaded a new firmware, you can actually do an upgrade right here. And then the next best thing is status. This will tell you what's going on. This will tell you what your firmware is, whether the servers are up, whether it's connected, and it'll let you know pretty well what's going on with the router. At this particular point, once you're completely done and you've clicked Save Settings, your router is officially configured. I would not recommend connecting up to the router wirelessly and then trying to configure it, because it's going to kick you off and you're going to have to program in all the wireless information to be able to hook back up. It's best to configure the router via an Ethernet connection and then connect up to the wireless after you're done configuring it. Otherwise, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot and make yourself have a lot of things that you're going to have to do. Now, if you want to be able to check out the different routers, that right here is a site that has the router emulators that'll allow you to see what it's going to look like before you even get in there. All you have to do is go to skyangel.wiki.com/emulators. I will have this link posted, and you can pull up the different ones and take a look at them. Like, let's pull up one of the D-links here. That's what the D-link's going to look like. And again, you can see the internet, the wireless settings, network settings. Here's your advanced, which gives you the virtual servers. Basically, it does absolutely nothing more than open up the ports. There's your port forwarding. There's your network filter, application rules, the firewall settings. Go to tools. Here you can set the time, do the firmware upgrade. There's the DDNS, logs, status. Again, this one will show you what all is going on. And then, of course, support. Okay, what would be another good one to look at? Here's Netgear. This is the other one I was telling you that's pretty common. Most of the Netgears aren't too bad. Here's everything over to the side. There's your basic setup, your wireless, the logs, the site blocking, which that's one of the nice things about Netgear, you can actually block specific sites. But the Linksys and all of them have it as well. Most of the newer Linksys ones will allow you to block specific sites. And again, that'll allow you to take a look at what all's in there and let you see what it's going to look like before you even log in to go in and make changes. Once you're completely done configuring the router, for the most part, especially with the encryption on the wireless, having the passphrase programmed in, you're going to make sure that absolutely nobody connects to your wireless network except for who you want connected to it, and of course all your own personal systems. It'll run the encryption on every device that you have connected to it, and it actually does encrypt the wireless traffic to where somebody sitting outside can't just pull up a packet sniffer and literally sit there, look at and read and intercept everything that your wireless network is doing. And it also makes it where they can't just easily connect up to it and steal free internet through your connection. If you know anybody that needs help with their systems, by all means direct them to my videos. If you'd like to keep up with what's most common current video is that come out, you can subscribe to the channel. I don't request everybody does it, but that's only if you want to be able to easily keep up with what's most recent. And as always, watch, like, and share, and have a good day.